welcome to Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games. My name is Brandon Waite.
And my name is Carter Mackey.
And this is episode 46, where we are talking about everybody's favorite game of exploration and prepositions, Near and Far. I've been holding on to that joke for a long time.
Yeah?
Yeah, I have. And I really hope it got some laughs on the other end of this show, because it didn't get any in the room, Carter.
I was laughing on the inside?
Let's just go ahead and move on, shall we? We'll start like we always do with the news before we head on to the review for Near and Far. Our first bit of news for this week comes to us from tablefor1.me, which is a site run by Frederick Schultz, where you can find great board game news and reviews. If you haven't checked that out, you absolutely should. Many thanks to Frederick Schultz for aggregating that for us. And our first bit of news is that Gloomhaven is getting a new game. Not really an expansion, its own standalone game called Jaws of the Lion, or Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. So this is interesting to me because Gloomhaven is obviously incredibly popular with solo gamers and multiplayer alike, but it's expensive.
Yes.
I mean, $100 I don't think is very much considering what you get in the box. I still think it's one of the best values in board gaming.
Right, it's a great deal, but it's still over $100.
But it's still over $100. And for a lot of people, the idea of 90 scenarios or whatever is just way too much. You probably won't play through this game. There's just always new stuff coming out, and it's going to distract you. And you know what if I don't get all this played? Well, if you're one of those folks, this might be the game for you. This is going to have fewer scenarios, fewer characters. So you're looking at 4 characters in the box, and I think 20-some scenarios. It's like a smaller legacy-style campaign game, basically. So if you like the idea of Gloomhaven, but you weren't sure that you wanted to play through a story that was quite that big, or you didn't want to wrestle with all the setup, this is a good alternative. It's going to be closer to $50, $60 when it goes on sale. And for me, one of the coolest ideas here is instead of setting up a map with tiles and all these other like pieces put on the board, you're going to have an adventure book set up similar to Stuffed Fables or actually to Near and Far.
Right.
I love this idea of the spiral bound book that you use as a board.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you really loved having to set up Gloomhaven every time, right?
Oh, man, I hate it. It's so brutal. Gloomhaven is a great game. We have not done a review for it on this show, but if you're just wondering like, oh, do they like it? I like it quite a bit.
I've only played it once with you.
Yeah.
But it was fun. It was great.
Yeah, it's a really clever game, does interesting things. The setup is insane. And that's with the broken token insert. I have that. It makes setup infinitely easier than if you didn't have it. And it still takes forever. So I really like the idea of this quite a bit. I'm not sure that I need it because I'll probably never play through all of Gloomhaven at this pace. But if you don't yet have a copy of it and you want to try out the system and see if it's something that is for you or if the bigger campaign would be a good fit for you, I think this sounds like an excellent place to start.
Yeah. Is it going to still have the same like basic systems, like character system and everything?
Yeah, that's my understanding. Same basic system, but you just will have named kind of pre-generated characters, I guess, with some of the familiar races that are in the other box, but a smaller story, and basically just everything's more manageable.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a neat idea. It'll go on sale in Q3 of 2020, so there is a bit of time before this comes out. But if you're interested in Gloomhaven and haven't tried it out yet, definitely check out Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. Our second bit of news for this week, and our final bit, is one that's a little bit different from us, but it's something that caught my eye. This is The Shores of Tripoli. This is a game that is on Kickstarter right now, and I'm not really sure how to describe this. It's a card-driven sort of war game based on the conflicts between the U.S. and the Barbary pirates. I don't really know U.S. history, but my understanding is that at some point, Thomas Jefferson or some other early president got fed up with pirates near Tripoli and sent the U.S. naval forces to go and combat them, and that's what this game is about.
Oh, okay.
But it's similar to Twilight Struggle, except that it can be played solo, and it's got a shorter playtime. If you've not heard of Twilight Struggle, this was a game about the Cold War that is sort of straddles a line between area control Eurogame and war game, and was actually the #1 game on Board Game Geek for a long time. It's an amazing game, very cool and thematic, but it takes a long time, and it's pretty heavy, and you can't play it solo. The idea of playing a similar game, still rooted in history, where you can fight pirates and play solo.
Yeah, that sounds good.
That sounds really cool.
What's their playtime, I guess, estimate?
Board Game Geek says between 45 and 60 minutes, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's a pretty brisk speed. I feel like a game that you're describing, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I just tend to associate war games with very heavy rule sets and long play times, and I don't know, Twilight Struggle is the only war game, if you could call it that, I guess, that has really grabbed me. But this one, I don't know, seems pretty cool.
Yeah.
This is something I'd be interested in trying or reviewing for the show. So thought I would mention it on here. And actually, we paused this recording just to check and see how long it has on Kickstarter. And it looks like the Kickstarter has just finished. Although I imagine you'll probably be able to late pledge for this if you're interested. So keep an eye out for that. That is The Shores of Tripoli. And that's all we've got for the news this week. So we're just going to jump right into the review, which is for Near and Far from Red Raven Games. This is a game that came out in 2017. It was originally a Kickstarter game, and it plays 2 to 4 players, or you can play 1 to 4 with a user-created variant, or you could also play solo using the co-op mode that comes in the expansion, the Amber Mines, which we'll also cover briefly on this episode, as long as you're willing to play two-handed with that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but that just lets you know there are 2 ways to solo this, and we'll talk about both of those. In Near and Far, you are going to play a character searching for the last ruin. You're going to be recruiting adventurers, hunting for treasure, and competing to be the most storied traveler. You have to collect food and equipment at town so that you can survive the long journeys to these mysterious places, making sure not to forget enough weapons to fight off bandits, living statues, and rusty robots and other crazy things that you'll run across in your adventures. And sometimes in your travels, you'll run into something unique. One of your friends will read what happens to you from a book of stories, giving you a choice of how to react, creating a new and memorable tale each time you play. So this is a game that when it came out made quite a splash because, Red Raven Games is well known for the fact that Ryan Lockett is the owner of this publishing company. He does the game design. He does the artwork, which is amazing.
Yeah.
He does a lot of the writing for these stories. And he just handles all the logistics on the publishing end. Although I do think they have a couple of employees now. But that is incredibly rare to find somebody who does all of that stuff and who has a reputation for doing it really well. And then this game made kind of a splash because this was one of the first games that I've seen that mixes Eurogame mechanics with a storytelling game.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting in that because I haven't seen a narrative game that has a couple of different Euro systems that still keeps it, I guess, non-cooperative where you're still competing, you're still earning points. I mean, I still can't really think of anything comes off the top of my head that's doing that right now too. That's big.
No, there's really nothing else out there quite like this. And so even the idea of it, I think, was just intriguing to a lot of people. I mean, it's different from his other designs, more ambitious for sure, because there's a lot of story text in this game.
Mm-hmm.
And then also just getting a look at the components, it doesn't look like a standard issue Euro game. And that'll bring us to the first section of the review where we just talk about the components here. And I think we got to say, I think this is a beautifully produced game.
Yeah. I mean, it's got a really solid art style that's very unique. It's not standard fare fantasy or anything like that. Everything's high quality, nice little wooden pieces, chunky cardboard cutouts for whatever you need. The storybook that you're using as this map that you go through is well illustrated and just well made with a spiral bound. It's all really high quality.
Yeah, it's high quality. The graphic design is very clear, I think. It's really easy to understand. Also, one thing that I just think is neat is his art style has this dreamlike quality to it that makes me think of video games like Shadows of the Colossus is what it calls to mind, which for me is incredibly high praise.
Right. I never played it, but I know that it's a good game.
It's brilliant. And this isn't solitary like that is, but in terms of the kind of dreamlike quality of the art and the environment, I think he does a really great job creating a world that feels different and mysterious in a way that makes you want to explore it. So all that comes through in the components really well. This is a good example of one of those games that is beautifully produced, but not kind of traditionally high quality components, I guess, in the sense that when you think a well-produced game now or a beautifully produced game, you think big miniatures, you think, 3D terrain pieces, you think all these really over the top overproduction most of the time. This is not that. It's still efficient production, but it's beautiful. It looks great on the table, and mechanically it's interesting because the maps in this game are all coming from the Spiral Bound book, like you mentioned, which is novel. But it's also cool because, really you could play this game on the same map over and over if you wanted to. But it's like it comes with 12 built-in maps.
Mm-hmm.
That's just neat. You could just vary up play by opening up to a different page and getting a whole different board. I think all of that makes this a very well-produced game. And then if you get the Amber Mines expansion, which we'll talk about a little bit later, it adds just more cards, more stuff of the same quality. And even I guess you wouldn't have encountered this because I was the one who actually opened the box and unwrapped everything. But I guess when they originally printed this, they saw that a couple of the expansion cards were a little bigger than the cards in the base game.
Mm-hmm.
And I held them up to the original deck. They are bigger, but just barely. But just to head off any kind of criticism, they include in the printing that I got replacement cards for those.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so they just, to me, that kind of attention to detail just shows they care about this side of things,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they want to treat the customer well. So it's a really nice package.
Yeah.
And even I would go so far as to say an elegant package. And that's something that I think the rules for the game are a little less so. Not that the rule book is bad. It's actually organized quite well and pretty easy to read. But the mechanics for the game feel like kind of a patchwork of things that I've never encountered before.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how you would organize this rulebook in an ideal way, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, there's definitely a multitude of systems that aren't really, I guess, like intuitively linked together necessarily. And so, yeah, that makes it difficult. It makes a fairly long rulebook for what's in it because it's not a hard game. It's not overly complicated. It's not a brain burner. But you do need to read the rules, and there's 39 pages. And they're not hard rules, but they're simple. It's just a lot of pages for, I would say, pretty simple rules.
Yeah, it's weird. The game does not feel like a 39 rule page kind of game at all. And that is kind of a barrier because there are enough things about this that are a little bit weird and different from traditional Euro games. I don't know what you would call this other than a Euro game.
Yeah.
I think it is. But it just borrows so many different mechanics and elements from other games that you just have to explain each one, and it takes a couple of pages here and a couple of pages there. And there are a number of times I've looked at this on my shelf and thought, I want to play that right now, but I don't feel like going through 39 pages of rules again.
Right.
Even if it's just an overview. So I think they've done as good a job with the rulebook as they can do. I guess that's what I would say. It's just that with this kind of design, it's just hard to find a flow that makes sense, and it's hard to explain it in a concise way.
Right.
And actually, that affects how we're going to talk about how the game plays and how we're going to review this game. We typically spend a little more time outlining the different mechanics of the games that we're talking about than we're going to here, and the reason for that is there are just so many different little systems that make up this game that it's hard to give all of them the credence that they deserve. And so what we're going to do is just kind of give you a broad overview of the two main areas of the game, because there are two kind of major parts here, and talk to you about how it feels to play the game. And so the two main areas of this game are town and shopping in the town and building up your supply package and all of that, gathering adventurers, and exploring the world. And I think the thrust of the game is supposed to be on exploring the world. That's the sort of the whole idea of the game, is you're going and searching for this lost city, trying to experience the story of what happens to you along the way, which you encounter out on the map as you adventure around. But you'll end up spending a lot of time, like half of your time, in the town area.
Yeah, more time than I want to spend.
Yeah, that's the trick of this game, I think, is when you're in town, you are gathering supplies. You're doing basic worker placement, essentially. There's a handful of spots. It's not complicated. But you do need to spend like 2 or 3, sometimes 4 turns at a time in town gathering supplies, getting adventurers, because the more of these things that you can gather, the further you can explore out on the board. Mm-hmm. Right? And the more efficient your exploration can be. And you need it to be efficient because this is still a competitive game. And actually, it's sort of a race game.
Yeah.
Really. You're like racing to put down tents on the main board and get points for that, because that's what's going to end the game, is when somebody runs out of the like 14 tents or however many you start with.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you also want to make sure that when the game ends, you have more points than everyone else. So there are several different ways that you can get points, but you're not going to be able to do well at all, no matter which kind of path you take, if you don't spend time in town pairing first.
Right. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about town first.
Yeah, I guess that makes the most sense. It's basic worker placement, right?
Right.
If a spot is occupied, with the exception of the saloon that you can go to visit to recruit adventurers, if a spot is occupied in a normal worker placement game, you just can't go to that spot. Here, it's a little bit different in that you can still go to the spot, but you have to duel the person who's in that spot. How do you feel about the duels in this game, Carter?
I hate it.
Yeah, I really strongly dislike the duel system in this game. I think that what they tried to do here is actually not bad. It's a good motivation behind the mechanic, because rather than just being shut down and being unable to go there entirely, you have the option of going, but it's basically you're engaging in a press your luck game in order to take the action you want to take.
Right, yeah. So you can modify, like when you duel another player, you're basically rolling dice and seeing who gets the better roll to try to have the privilege of using that space. And you can do things to modify that roll to increase your chances. But like, I think for me, thematically, it's weird because I don't really think of this as being like I'm going to duel other people in town.
See, that's weird to me that you don't think of it that way, because my thing is when I go into Walmart, if there is anybody else in Walmart, we will fight until one of us ends up in jail before we can get our groceries.
Right, exactly. If someone's blocking the aisle you need to get to, it's time to throw down. Yeah, I don't know. It's weird because what I want to do is go out and explore. And I don't really want to go to town, and I definitely don't want to go to town to duel. But yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. Like, it's trying to kind of solve this problem of having this like worker placement element and have it to where the places aren't completely blocked. But it also feels bad to just roll dice and sometimes just get bad rolls and you can't do the spaces and you have to spend even longer in town than you wanted to in the first place. I don't know. It's a thing I very much dislike.
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind here is you can modify your result quite a bit. It's not just one die result versus another, right? And you mentioned there are ways to modify it. The main way that you modify it is by recruiting other adventurers to be in your party who have little icons of a sword on them. Mm-hmm. For every sword you have, you can add one to your roll, which is a neat idea. But when you recruit adventurers, you have kind of three icons that you're looking for on there. There are eyeballs, which will give you more gems and money when you're out searching in the world. There are little skill symbols, which will help you to dig further and deeper in the mine, which is another area of town that you can just go to and earn points and get money and stuff. Or you can get swords, and swords will allow you to fight bandits and do better at story missions and allow you to do better at dueling. And I guess I should say those little hands, the skill icon, they also let you do better at story stuff as well. Mm-hmm. So the problem for me with the dueling is, even though I can choose at the beginning of the game, I'm going to recruit a bunch of adventurers with swords so that whenever I go to duel somebody, I'm probably going to win. Right? That's a way of approaching this.
Right, because you just recruit a gang of thugs and you go around and bully people who get in your way.
Yes. Yeah. That way I can go visit any Walmart I want to and have the store all to myself the way that I want it. It's weird thematically, but also mechanically, I'm ambivalent about it because I really do like the problem that it's trying to solve. But I guess I just think it's not really a problem. Like, just let two of us go to the same place. Mm-hmm. It doesn't need to be worker placement. It can just be action selection when you're in town and eliminate that whole thing. And they also try to massage that a little bit by saying, if you fight somebody, you can gain or lose reputation. There's a little reputation track that you can get points depending on how far up it you are, or, buy different artifacts depending on how much or how little reputation you have. They treat it almost like a resource in the game, which is interesting, but not interesting enough that I want it to be there. I guess. And for a lot of people, this won't be a big deal at all.
Sure.
But for me, it just felt weird, and it felt worse in the solo game, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Mm-hmm. But yeah, not my favorite thing. And actually, we should probably say, I like this game. But one of the things that this game does kind of consistently that boggles the mind for me is it has all these mechanics that don't really support the main theme of the game very well, right? So like dueling everybody that you meet in town, doesn't make that much sense. In the same way that doesn't make much sense, the whole idea of going out and exploring the world or going to visit other places in town, for instance, the mine, it doesn't make much sense either. You're going to visit a mine in town, and you can get rid of some of your tents that you have to get rid of to get points and in the game by going into the mine.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess thematically, you're going in and looking for gems and money and camping in the mine, and you get points for camping in the mine. That doesn't support the overall theme of exploration very well.
Yeah.
In the same way, when you go out into the world, which is the other kind of major half of this game, you have these options as you go in and explore different places in the world to engage with the different points on the map. Sometimes those are story points where you open up this storybook and we read a text to one another and we have this cool and interesting story choice that has ramifications down the road. Like that whole system is kind of amazing.
Yeah,
really.
It's great.
It's a really brilliant, well thought out system that uses the things that you gained in town to help aid you in your choices. But what's weird about it is, like, that's the cool part of the game. But if you want to win the game, you need to focus on just going to places that will give you money or gems, or just putting down tents and camping for the night. Like, the majority of the game becomes go beat bandits, go lay down tents, go get money. And the faster and better and more efficiently you do that, the better your chances of winning the game.
Right. And I feel like we should say also, like, the kind of other half of the game we're talking about with, like, the kind of overmap where you're leaving town and stuff. It's, yeah, a map, and it's like a dangerous place. And so what you're doing is slowly making expeditions, setting up more camps so you can spread out and do this, exploration and kind of make your way through it. And yeah, that's all fun. But yeah, it becomes the focus on these, like, getting to those points, getting the tents out and everything.
Yeah. Every time you move from one point to another in the game, you're going to be losing health if you haven't put down a tent there already. So if you just keep wandering out into the wilds, like, for instance, to get to one of those story points, you're going to lose health as you go. And when you put down a tent, you're going to lose more health. And so you want to keep going back to town so that you can get more adventurers, so you can have more health, like collective health, I guess, to spend putting down tents. But that means that at least for the first several turns of the game, you're returning to town quite a lot because you really need to go out, get some money and gems, come back, get more adventurers, go back out, explore some more, and then just kind of repeat that back and forth cycle. It's not bad at all. Like, I feel like I'm sounding negative when I actually really like this game a lot, but it does have a weird pace.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The pacing is, you're spending a little too much downtime, or more than I want for the pace. And it's definitely not even the beginning to me.
You mean it's all throughout the game, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's interesting is you need to go back to town, even if you're not on the verge of death, because leaving town is what refills your health. So you need to go back to town, take an action, and then leave town again if you want to have full health and go out and explore some more. Which is interesting because I've never played a game quite like that, or that uses that sort of mechanic. And it does keep you bouncing back and forth between these two major halves. So one isn't completely irrelevant or anything like that. They're both incredibly necessary to your success. But I just end up feeling like the part of the game I want to play is out here on the map. And I have to keep heading back to town just so I can survive.
Right.
That means that I end up spending half the game doing things that are less fun to me. But one thing that I think is really fascinating, if you get past like the how you win part of the game for a minute, when you look at the story of the game and how you experience the story when you actually are out in the world, it is fascinating because this game comes with 3 main ways to play. You have an arcade mode, which is like a deck of cards that you just, when you encounter a story event, you just flip one of these cards and do what it says. Which is not very engaging.
Right.
But it does mean the game has basically infinite play if you're satisfied with that deck. But the cooler thing about this is that this game comes with several characters that you can play. Each of these characters has their own mini campaign, which is wild.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, like with its own side quests and different outcomes and kind of branching paths and stuff. It's fascinating. And on top of that, there is a kind of general main campaign that you can play with any character. That means that you can play this game so many times, like dozens of times, before you actually get to the point where you run out of new story to experience.
And I would say the story that's there is very well written.
Yeah, it's well written, and like the scenes that you encounter are cool. And I found myself even thinking of the mechanical benefits of the story when I'm engaged in it. Like if a story says, you can either attack this camp that has these lizard folk nomads, or you can try to befriend them and trade with them. That's not a real story choice here, so no spoilers or anything, but like that's the kind of choice you would make. I know, like if I go trade with them, I'll probably get some money and gems, right? And I'll probably get some positive reputation. And more importantly, I'll get a faction banner, which is like you've earned the trust of this faction, basically. And those are important resources for buying artifacts, which will get you points at the end of the game. But what's interesting to me is I know, like, I can guess if I go do the nice thing, I'll probably get that banner that I need to fulfill this quest.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like the story is completely detached from the mechanics in that way.
Yeah,
right?
That's a good point, too.
But the point we were trying to make before is just that in a game about exploring, it seems weird that the mechanical thrust is like, how quickly can I put down tents, whether it's in the mine in town or out on the board. So the story is so good that I experienced a quandary in this game I've never experienced anywhere else. I found myself wanting to experience the story points on the board, even when that was not the most mechanically beneficial thing for me to do.
Yeah, and that's a weird tension to have, at least to me. Like, I feel like those things should be, I don't know, just more connected, or like they should be more rewarding, or I don't know. But yeah, it's a strange tension.
Yeah, I'm of two minds about it, because on the one hand, I'm like, man, what a testament to how good the story part of this game is, right? That like, I like to win games when I'm playing competitively. And if you have me thinking, I might just go over here and experience this story because that's more fun, that's a testament to your writing and how you've structured the story system. But also, I shouldn't feel like I'm giving up a shot at victory to do that.
Right.
The rewards for the stories aren't bad.
No.
But almost always you know what kind of reward you can get if you choose to go camp somewhere else, right? Or go to try to establish a trade route or something.
Which is like a lot of points and thematically bizarre to me.
Yeah. One of the other major way you can get points is by putting down tents on two spots on the map that have the same kind of trade icon, like a tea trade route or a gear trade route or whatever. Yeah, it just doesn't fit with everything else that's going on in the game. But the benefit of it is I can look at that and I can know if I go here and camp and I go here and camp, I'll get this many points.
Right.
If you go do a story thing, you'll get some good stuff, but you just don't have any idea exactly what you'll get. Like you can kind of reason through it once you hear the story, but going into that spot, you don't know what you're going to encounter. It's just weird. I've never had a game that made me make that choice before. And that's not a bad thing. It's just different, which I guess is kind of where I land on this game overall. My major impression of this game is I really enjoy it. It's a quick play time, and because it's kind of a race to get the most points, it actually plays quicker than you would think. And because it plays quicker than you would think, you're more likely to get it to the table with other people and actually play through the campaign or even a character's campaign, because those are only 4 or 5 games long.
Mm-hmm.
All that is good. But the main thing I would say about it is you don't have a game like this in your collection.
Yeah.
Like, period. Unless you own Above and Below, which is kind of the prequel or brother-sister game to this. That's just not as good, in my opinion. There's not a game that I've ever played that's like this out there. I mean, that mashes up several different elements from other Euro games and gives you like some interesting choices to make mechanically and preserves the competitive nature, but also gives you this rich story. So, all that to say, the base game of this is quite good. And we'll talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly at the end of the review like we always do, but because there's so much to cover here, I think it's just important to say at this point in the review, I like the game, and if you only get the base game, it's really interesting and good, and even if you don't love everything in it, like I don't, I still find it to be a very compelling game because I haven't played anything else like it. Now that said, there is an expansion available for this game, and this is where we can start talking about like other play options, including solo play specifically. So there is an expansion for this game called the Amber Mines, which just adds a bunch of different modules that you can add or not as you prefer. We can talk about everything that this adds, but I'm not sure that would be super beneficial. You can find some pretty quick overviews of this. I will say that it does spice up some of the parts of the game that I found to be a little bland. So, for instance, there is a tile now that you can put in town over the general store location, which I never visited for. It just wasn't quite good enough compared to the other actions. It's now really amped up. So it's a place that everybody wants to go visit. I really like that. It also gives you the option of getting health while you're in town. Normally you have to leave town to get more health. And that means if you want to duel successfully, you want to come back to town with a little bit of health left still. Because one thing we didn't mention is when you roll the dice, not only are you adding your swords, but you can choose to decrease your health by 1 to add 1 to your roll. So the more health you have, the less just random luck you're dealing with here. This gives you a place to go where you can actually recover a little health in town, which is really nice. So I like that quite a bit. There's a magic system that this adds, where you can get points at the end of the game for collecting the most magic, which is fine. But the cool part of it is you can get spells now when you go to the Mystic's Hut. So you can get these cards that give you like a really powerful ability that you can use one time and then flip the card over. But then when you go back to this hut, you refresh the card. So you can sort of build a magic engine almost if you really want to. That's a clever idea and just something that kind of spices it up a little bit.
Right.
And that's sort of what the expansion does throughout, really. So there's another module called the Amber Mines, which actually, instead of just doing a little spreadsheet on the board to figure out how many points you get for visiting the mine, you actually go into the mines and explore things and fight creatures. And it basically adds another place for you to explore besides the main board. And aesthetically, it looks really cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's a really cool idea of it's just a deck of cards that's going to kind of basically randomize how you like delve through the mine. I don't know. It's a neat idea. I like it a lot.
Yeah, I thought so too. A really clever idea. And it's kind of a table hog all of a sudden when you play with this, because you do have to lay out the cards next to one another and sort of form a path that is, you're not quite sure which direction it's going to head. So that can be a problem space-wise. But it's a neat idea, and it's a good way to change up the game, I think. But probably my favorite new thing about this expansion is the new threat deck. So as you're going throughout the world exploring in the base game, you just kill off these bandits and monsters of increasing difficulty, which gives you points and allows you to put down a tent in addition to the one that you'll put out when you camp. It's a good way to earn points, and it's just a cool system, I guess. But it's pretty one note in the base game. Like, you know, if I kill this thing, I'm going to get points. This new threat deck gives you new monster pictures, like more interesting creatures to fight against, I think, and gives you a variety of rewards like reputation or gold or gems. And I don't know, it's nice that you can get some rewards that aren't just in-game bonuses.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree.
It gives you a new way to sort of build your engine and keep that going, which is really cool. And there are some other elements of this expansion that are cool too, and that are definitely worth checking out. But that gives you an idea of what the box includes. It's quite a bit, really, for such a small box. A lot of just variety.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to change it up from game to game. Including, by the way, a whole little mini campaign that you can play with in the box, which is neat. It comes with its own little mini storybook in addition to the rules. But the thing that most solo players will be interested in is that it also adds a co-op mode. Now, I'm going to say here, we're going to talk about how to play this solo specifically for just a minute. I will say that I tried the co-op mode. You didn't try the co-op at all, right?
Nope.
It is interesting. Basically, there is a big boss from the last session of the main campaign that you can fight against in the co-op mode. And so you will control multiple characters, and you have kind of a time track that you're trying to, basically by the end of the game, you want to have defeated this big boss and have enough points that you win the game. So there are two kind of factors that you're trying to get there in order to win. It's a really neat idea. It preserves most of the core systems of the game, which I think is really nice. It gets rid of dueling, which is super nice.
Yeah.
Because I don't like that element really at all. The downside for me, though, was I sometimes can handle managing multiple characters. In this particular instance, it felt like a little much to me. If you're comfortable doing multiple characters, though, I think this is a really cool way to play the game. It preserves most of it while making it quote unquote cooperative, I guess, by just adding one small thing. I say quote unquote because it's obviously not built from the ground up to be a cooperative game. But basically, you want both of your characters to be getting lots of points because you're going to have to add their scores together to see if you win. So that's a pretty neat idea. But the way that I chose to play solo primarily was through a user-created solo variant, which is pretty cool. This is a variant that is created by a BGG user who's Greek and who has a very difficult name to pronounce for an American. It's Themistocles. If you're looking for this variant, probably the easiest place to find it is either on the files page of the Near and Far page on BGG, or what I would recommend to you is if you don't want to print out the cards for the AI, you can go to this wonderful geek list that we have referenced before called Digital Automas. There is a guy on Board Game Geek who's developing these great, simple, web-based automa decks that you can use instead of printing and cutting out your own cards, and it works beautifully.
Yeah, super simple and easy to use, gives you the information you need while you're tracking it. It just, it does a really good job with this automa card system.
Yeah, actually, it's really handy because in this variant, you're going to have more people in the town. So you have more spaces that are blocked and that you will have to duel for, which is not my favorite thing.
Right.
And so that is one major difference. But the other major difference is you can actually take 2 actions at a time when you're in town, and so can the automa. And that is balanced by the fact that the automa is going to alternate turn to turn, whether it takes an action in town or takes one out on the board. And if you were printing out the deck of cards, what you would do is, like, the top half of each card in this deck is dedicated to town actions, and the bottom half is dedicated to the exploring action. And you would just have to remember, okay, this last round I played a town action. Next round I need to play an explore action. You just have to keep that in your head or turn the card sideways or something. When you use the digital automa, it highlights which section of the card you're looking at for this round, which is super handy.
Yeah.
And really, what's beautiful about this variant is you can play with one character, and there's not so much to manage on the automa's side as far as like what resources it can or can't gather and how it handles its actions or any of that. It works pretty much like yours, with the exceptions like figuring out which space it's going to travel to.
Yeah, which you have to like look at a chart thing, But
even looking at the chart isn't bad.
Right.
It was a little confusing to me at first when I read the rules, but after I looked at it, I was like, oh, I'm making this way harder than it actually is supposed to be.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, very straightforward, very simple. And with this thing reminding you whether it needs to take town actions or take explore actions, playing against this thing is easy. So if you really like this game, but you have trouble getting people to the table often enough to play the campaign, this is an outstanding way to play because it's basically the exact same as playing it multiplayer like we talked about earlier, with the exception of your town actions are actually more efficient, which is really nice, and you'll duel more.
Yeah.
That part was not great for either of us. But that being said, if you don't mind the dueling thing, and I suspect that most people don't care that much, I mean, those are really the only big changes here.
Right. I mean, and this is like a small minor thing, but like, unlike some adventure books, it assumes that the person next to you is going to read the story from the story text to you. And so you just have to like cover it up with your hand or just not look or something like that as you go through it. Because obviously you'll be reading all of it yourself. Yeah.
And that was a little harder than I thought it would be, because the way that the book is structured, you have like these 2 boxes with different options, like trade with these lizard folk or kill them, and you really only need to see the very top line of text in each of these boxes, but they're usually stacked one on top of another.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of have to put your hands down in 2 different places in the book and then read. I don't know. It's just trickier than you would think.
Right.
Because you really aren't supposed to know what your rewards are going to be before you make your choice.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a little tricky, but otherwise, I mean, there aren't that many campaign games that are easy to get to the table multiplayer, I think, especially at the rate at which people are consuming games and the rate at which good games are coming out. It's just increasingly difficult. So if you're a solo player, this is a gift. I mean, this is a really cool way to experience all the content that's in this game that might otherwise take you ages to get through. So very cool. The only thing I would say about this that I'm not crazy about beyond the lots of dueling is I found this variant to be crazy difficult.
Yeah, there was no chance I was going to win ever when I played.
Yeah, and I can't tell if that's like a me thing or if it's a design thing or maybe it's just a little bit of both.
Right. I mean, what helps is me not really caring about scoring the most points.
That is true. It is kind of nice in this game that you do have that pull toward the story and the exploration over winning by points. And actually, I feel even less of a desire to win when I'm playing solo than I do multiplayer. There's still something about sitting around the table with other people that you're like, okay, but I still do want to win, though.
Right. I need to quantify my superiority to you.
Yes. Yeah, that's what my whole life is about, Carter.
Right.
Thank you for understanding me. But when I'm playing against an imaginary character and nobody else is going to know, I can save face, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's kind of nice that urge you feel when you play this game to go ahead and just indulge in the story instead of winning. You can indulge it here. You feel a little more permissed to do so,
yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, I still feel like there is, I guess, as I say that, there is somewhat of a tension of like, I am still trying to score as many points. So it feels a little bad knowing that, like, I'm just not doing a good job at it, I guess. But yeah, I don't know.
I guess that's true, because if you just wanted to experience the story, you could just read it.
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
So, I don't know. I do really think that this is a clever system. I love the idea of making the automa alternate between explore and town actions. That's very clever. Like the top half, bottom half card system is great, because that means that one automa deck has quite a bit of variability. It's just really nice, and then the way it's implemented is great. It's just the difficulty thing. And again, your mileage may vary, because I could just suck at this game. That is entirely possible, but I did get walloped pretty bad. Either way, I do think that it's nice that you have two different options to play. So if you're thinking about whether this is a game for you, you can just know whether you're comfortable playing only one character or you're comfortable playing two. You have multiple options here, and that's really nice. I know that was hitting a lot very quickly, even though we're already like more than 40 minutes into the episode at this point. I'm sure some of you will wish that we had gone more in depth in some of these mechanics. I'm sorry that we can't quite do that without making this episode ridiculously long, but I think that gives you a pretty good idea of what it's like to play this game solo and to experience this system. So let's just move like we always do into the good, the bad, and the ugly for this game. And most of what I had to say about this game, even though it might not have sounded like that at different points in the review, is actually very good. I think the number one thing that I would say about this game is the story is very cool.
Yeah, I think it's a cool story. And for me, it's almost even just that kind of atmosphere or tone that the story creates in the art is like what really helps sell it for me, or like is enjoyable to me. But yeah, the story is definitely solidly in the good, and just, the general aesthetic of it.
Yeah, and even just like the way that you can play the game with those character backstories and the main campaign. To me, what was cool is being able to play through the character backstories and then take them on the main campaign, where you actually you're invested in this character and you know them at this point in their story. I think that's really neat. That's what makes me get this game out when it's time to play. I guess the other good things I would say about this game, yes, component quality is very good, very high. The art is beautiful. The thing that's harder to quantify is that you don't have a game like this. It's hard to find games nowadays that don't fit into a category pretty easily, right? There are lots of hybrid games and games that are sort of area control and sort of drafting or whatever. But this game is so many different parts that it feels like something different and unique in the market. I've not seen anything else mesh up those Euro mechanics and storytelling stuff.
For me, I think this is kind of a dual one in the sense that that's very true, and there's nothing like it. So it definitely will have its own place in your collection if you have it. But at the same time, for me, it's a little bit of a miss in kind of some of the things in the way they're put together, in that it doesn't make as compelling as a game. Like, I think it's enjoyable and you could have a good time. But yeah, just the way some of the systems fit together, it makes me not like it, I think, quite as much as you do.
Yeah, I think I was still going to put this in the bad category also. And I think maybe it's okay for us to move on to that category at this point. Yeah, it is a double-edged sword for me. I think that it's really interesting. I do think one thing that I would say is bad about this game is that the primary mechanics that you use to win don't support the element of the game that is most compelling, which is the story.
Mm-hmm.
At least it doesn't support it in quite the way that I want. Like one thing that you mentioned before we started this episode was the game doesn't feel, the mechanics don't feel that thematic, which is wild because I would say, if you ask me, I would say this is a very thematic game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the story is there, it's rich and has this interesting world, and yet you're putting down tents in a mine.
Yeah, you're putting down tents in a mine. I mean, there's things where like there is like an equipment aspect of this game where you're getting treasures and that makes you more powerful, assembling a band of adventurers. Like all those things are good and cool. But like the way the collecting resources works, like you said, even putting down tents in the wilderness, like am I setting up like a trade network, like across the map? And then also the whole points from trading. I don't know. Those are strange things to me.
Yeah, if I'm journeying to like resolve some personal story in the character mode or to find the last ruin in the main campaign, why am I establishing trade networks along the way? That just doesn't make much sense to me really at all. For me, that's a bad thing, I guess. It's just that it just doesn't make sense for some of this stuff to be here.
Yeah.
This is true for anything, but I think for a lot of people, they're not going to find that to be an issue and just will be happy that there are Euro mechanics in a storytelling game.
Yeah.
And that's totally justifiable because you're not going to find that many other places.
Right.
But that is one thing that felt a little bit off to me. And actually, I would say that's the primary thing that felt off to me. The only other bad thing that I would say is that if you're going to play this solo, at least for me, I have to give up on winning.
Yeah.
I'm sure that other people have no problem winning this game solo, but I think it's very hard.
Yeah.
And I don't want to hit that note too hard because I'm really grateful to the Board Game Geek user who just gave his time in order to make this so that people can play it solo, and to the guy who digitized it.
Yeah, which makes it that much easier.
Man, yeah, thank you both if you're listening, and I would be honored if you were. Thank you for doing this. Yeah, it is, for me, it's just really hard. That's the only other element of the game that I would say is bad. And again, that's just for my taste. But there's nothing to this game that I would say is ugly.
Right. I mean, I hate dueling, but I wouldn't put it in the ugly category.
No, I don't think I would either. That'll go in the bad category for me too. I don't like the dueling system. But I guess overall, my impressions of this game are I really like this game quite a bit. I've had it in my collection for a few years now. I really like it. I have played it many times at this point. And I just love that it occupies such a little niche that nobody else has quite filled. But it's not without its issues, right?
Right.
And from my perspective, it's okay to like a thing and acknowledge that it might have multiple flaws.
Right.
And for me, this is flawed, but a beautiful and interesting game. And one that you can play solo, which is going to make getting through the campaign and experiencing the story, the coolest part, much easier.
Mm-hmm.
But that said, I would not buy this for solo play exclusively, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, you can make it work for solo, but it's not, to me, it's not a super compelling solo experience. And I mean, to me, it's like even in the design with like the modifications of either the cooperative mode that's included with the expansion or these, user created rules, like the core game is still like there's something about the like kind of racing against someone else that's integrated pretty heavily into the game, in my mind at least.
Yeah, I think so. It just feels better multiplayer. It makes a little more sense mechanically multiplayer, even if that mechanic still doesn't make sense thematically.
Right.
And also there's something to be said for sharing a story experience. Like I really enjoy playing story-based games solo, but not only is it difficult to just read the book when somebody else is there, but there's just something you lose when you don't experience that story with somebody else, I think. But I do like it. I do enjoy it. If you have a copy of this game, you should explore the solo mode that's available for it. If you think that this is the kind of game that you would play with other people sometimes and want to play solo, this was going to be a great option for you. I think this is really going to hit the spot for a lot of people because it's not heavy Euro and it gives you some cool theme. That's all we've got for this review this time. A couple of things we want to hit before this episode ends. And if you're used to turning off the podcast at this point, you're going to want to listen here. The first thing I will say is we are giving away a new in shrink copy of Near and Far. We got the Amber Mines as a review copy, which we're very grateful to Red Raven that they would share that with us. But when I contacted them via email, I asked about the expansion, and they ended up sending the expansion and the base game. And I've already got the base game. So I'm going to hang on to my copy of the base game and the expansion as well. but we will give away the new and shrink copy of Near and Far. So if you would like to do that, go on to our Facebook page and you can find out more information about how you can enter that giveaway there. Also, if you haven't heard yet, we are a member of the Dice Tower Network. If you want to find other podcasts about board games that are similar in tone to ours, you can go on to dicetower.com and find out more about the other shows in the network. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and that's a good way to see what we're playing and what we're interested in right now. We share some news stories on there from time to time, so check that out. You can find us on Instagram at Solosaurus Podcast. Also, if you haven't yet, please go on and rate us or review us on iTunes. A lot of you have done that at this point, and we are very thankful for that. If you have not done that, just take a few minutes. Even if you don't use iTunes regularly, open it up and give us a review. That really helps us to publicize the show. Also, one last thing. If you are on Board Game Geek and you would like a micro badge that shows everybody your love for this show, we have one, and we are happy to give it to you for free. Just send me a message on there, and I'll be more than happy to give you the Geek Gold that you need to get that. That's all we've got for this episode, folks. Until next time, I'm Brandon Waite.
And I'm Carter Mackey.
And this is Solosaurus.